Hello, you're listening to Wait, How Do You Spell That? A Rare Disease podcast. My name is Colby, and I'm the editor here at Patient Worthy. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate it. And today we're going to be discussing tuberous sclerosis complex, also known as TSC. That's a rare genetic disorder that causes non-cancerous tumors to grow in many parts of the body, commonly in the brain, kidneys, heart, lungs, and skin. And to help in our discussion today, I'm happy to say that we have a very special returning guest. Kari Rosbeck is the president and CEO of the TSC Alliance. That's a nonprofit dedicated to supporting people living with TSC and also driving research into promising treatment, among many other things. The TSC Alliance is also celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. Kari, welcome to the show. It's fantastic to have you back once again to update us on all the great work going on over at the TSC Alliance.
Thank you for having me, Colby. I'm thrilled to be returning.
And we're really glad to have you back. And to start with, would you mind giving us a little more information about tuberous sclerosis complex for listeners who may not be familiar?
Well, you did a great job. TSC causes tumors, generally non-cancerous tumors, to grow throughout the body. It is the leading genetic cause of epilepsy and one of the leading genetic causes of autism. So about 85% of individuals with TSC will develop epilepsy, 65% of those individuals within the first year of life, 50% of individuals with TSC will be on the autism spectrum. TSC impacts 1 in 6,000 live births, about 50,000 Americans or 1 million people worldwide. And just to put that in perspective, everywhere in the world, every 20 minutes, a child is born with tuberous sclerosis complex. We also know that TSC is highly variable, even among identical twins. We have individuals with TSC that are neurologists. We also have individuals with TSC that are nonverbal. And so it really is the spectrum of the disease.
So a condition that can have far-reaching implications and certainly can affect different body systems in many different ways as well. So can you tell us a little about some of the unique challenges that are faced by people living with TSC and their families?
Absolutely. So tuberous sclerosis complex is a progressive lifetime disease. And all too often, although it's been better in the last 20 years, individuals are sometimes undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. And sometimes it's hard for families, particularly in rural areas, to find doctors familiar with the disease. When TSC presents itself in the brain, it can seriously impact quality of life. So in addition to the seizures that I mentioned, one of the biggest unmet needs in TSC is TAN, TSC-associated neuropsychiatric disorders. So that is something that impacts the brain function, and it's an umbrella term. So it can impact sleep disorders. It can impact executive functioning, how people learn, depression, ADHD, of course, autism spectrum, and anxiety being one of the aspects of TAN we hear is the most bothersome across the spectrum of individuals. And then, of course, aggressive behavior. And we know that has impact quality of life for many families. So I think that definitely is one of the unique factors of TSC, one that we're really trying to uncover and through research trying to impact. And then because TSC is variable person to person and a complex disease, it requires many specialists across a lifetime. So from neurologist to dermatologist to pulmonologist, nephrologist, all the ologists, psychologists, psychiatrists. And so really what is important in TSC is that complex care.
So what are some of the most significant ways then that the TSC Alliance helps to provide support to families, either short-term or throughout their life?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. So we really take seriously providing tools and support systems for individuals and their caregivers with TSC. We developed in 2001 a TSC Navigator. So this was an important proactive tool that can be found on our website that really helps individuals walk through a lifetime of TSC. It gives them bite-sized information, and depending on how much information they want to absorb, they can go deeper and deeper and deeper. So there are fact sheets, there are webinars, there are all kinds of other tools that they can access. We also have support navigators or individuals on our team that have been trained, many of whom have lived experiences with TSC, that are there to take questions and guide families in the right directions of resources that are available to them. We have absolutely a robust website that has webinars, brochures, information. As an organization, we have organized consensus conferences. So we have recommendations from TSC experts on how TSC is diagnosed, how TSC is surveyed, or the kind of testing that you need throughout a lifetime, and what are the appropriate treatments. Really importantly, we have 74 recognized TSC clinics across the United States, 17 of which are centers of excellence. So we will help direct you to clinics in your area or clinics maybe that you can go to get that comprehensive care. As an organization, we also have something called the Be Careful Travel Fund. So this is run through NORD, and it is families can apply to receive supplemental funding so that they are able to access that care at a TSC recognized clinic if there's not one in their local area. So those are a few of the ways that we support families. Now, last time I was on your show, I talked about our 36 volunteer branches across the country. One of the things that happened in the pandemic is we realized that 36 volunteer branches was necessary when we had a lot of in-person meetings. But people can get support, as you know, through social media 24/7. We've since shrunk down our volunteer branches to 14 regions across the United States. Those overlap with our TSC clinics. And in those 14 regions, we also provide peer-to-peer support. So that's really important to talk to somebody who has lived your journey. And we make those connections for newly diagnosed individuals or caregivers.
A lot of great resources, it sounds like, for the TSC community. And of course, the TSC Alliance, as we mentioned earlier, has been around for a long time, helping to support this community. You're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the organization this year, which is a huge milestone for any nonprofit, let alone one dedicated to a rare cause. Congratulations.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. And you yourself have been with the organization for over 20 years now. Looking back over the decades, of course, you named some of these programs that you've gotten in place to help support TSC patients, but what are some of the other significant milestones that stick out to you?
Absolutely. So things that TSC Alliance has funded or catalyzed, if you will, starting with our research grants that we first started funding in 1984. That was a big move forward for the organization way back 40 years ago. We also helped fund the discovery of the 2 genes that cause TSC, which has really been important to all of the advances in research that have been made. In 2006, we helped start the very first natural history database for TSC anywhere in the world. It still exists today. We have 2,700 participants.
Wow.
That has been so amazing to allow us to understand how TSC progresses through a lifetime. It's just been a really pivotal tool for us. Mm-hmm. Some of the other advances, of course, the approval of vigabatrin. Vigabatrin is a first-line treatment for infantile spasms in TSC. And we were at the advisory hearing. We collected written testimony. We helped recruit volunteers to provide oral testimony. And we know from the people that were on the advisory committee, their recommendation very much hinged on the testimony of those that received benefit from vigabatrin. So that's been a big part of our history. Of course, we now have 3 specific drugs to treat TSC. Everolimus, an mTOR inhibitor that shrinks tumors in the brain and kidney and is adjunctive therapy for epilepsy. We have Epidiolex, which is a treatment for seizures associated with TSC. And in 2002, our most recent approved treatment, Hiftor, which treats facial angiofibromas associated with TSC. Those are some of the really big milestones. And then one of the most recent is the first preventative clinical trial for epilepsy in the United States. And this trial utilized vigabatrin to try to delay or ameliorate seizures before they even started. So those were huge milestones that we're very proud of.
And one of the big pillars, as you mentioned, of the TSC Alliance is research. So helping to fund what you just mentioned, all these breakthroughs in the treatment of some of the factors or the symptoms that people have from TSC. And you've done this through a number of different means. Can you tell us about the strategy behind where the organization has chosen to invest in research and how this has helped to accelerate breakthroughs in treatment?
Absolutely. So we have spent the last 2 decades really honing our research platform and wrote a very aggressive research business plan in 2019 to really push research forward or accelerate drug development to really improve quality of life for individuals with TSC and to de-risk drug development, if you will. We want to make sure that new treatments are getting to our community as quickly as possible to change the course of the disease. So our platform, if you look at the drug discovery pipeline, starts with innovative research. Those research grants that I mentioned that started in 1984 that are really meant to fund new ideas. New ideas is what's going to continue to fill the pipeline. We also want to invest in new investigators in TSC so that the next generation of TSC scientists is born. From there, we developed a preclinical consortium in 2016. So we work with a contract research organization. We've licensed mouse models both for tumor growth, for epilepsy. We're developing mouse models for TAND, as I mentioned, and for lymphangioliomyomatosis, or LAM, in conjunction and partnership with the LAM Foundation. So industry can come in and say, I'd like to test this compound we think may work in TSC. And we have the mouse models because we've licensed them from those that created them, and make it very easy for a company to come in and test new treatments. But simultaneously, through donor dollars, we will test drugs that are nominated by academic researchers. So this preclinical consortium has really built a robust pipeline for research in TSC. We also have a clinical research consortium. So this started with 5 TSC clinics coming together to work on clinical studies and clinical trials. So the PREVENT trial was one of those early studies that they came together to work on. In the past year, in fact, we've made a decision to expand our clinical research consortium to any TSC clinic that would like to be involved in research and clinical studies and clinical trials, in evidence-based care, quality improvement studies, and we're building what that new consortium, that new expanded consortium will look like. But we believe that taking new treatments out of preclinical and moving it into the clinical research consortium will be much more robust with this expanded clinical research. And then, of course, we have our natural history database that we talked about earlier. We also paired that with a biosample repository. So we are collecting medical records from individuals with TSC and entering that data in the natural history database, and then partnering that with blood samples or buccal swabs. So we get the DNA of individuals that agree to participate. And recently we've added whole genome sequencing. That's important because the natural history database has helped us understand how TSC progresses through a lifetime. What the biosample repository and whole genome sequencing will allow us to do is understand why is TSC so different person to person, and what treatments in the future we may know that might work best on each individual. So really exciting tools that work together to really push drug discovery from the left and pull it from the right.
Mm-hmm. A lot of time and effort and work that goes into that. And kind of keeping the lens on research then at the moment, what does the treatment landscape for TSC look like right now? And what current research looks especially promising in the future?
So that is such an amazing question. As I mentioned, we do have 3 approved treatments for TSC. So the mTOR inhibitors have been such an effective treatment for shrinking tumors, but they don't cure the disease. If you go off treatment, the tumors can grow back. So we know we're on the right track. We're just not all the way there. And there is more research being done for next generation mTOR inhibitors that might have more effectiveness in the brain, but also less side effects for individuals taking the drug. One of the side effects that people get are mouth sores. And so we want to have better mTOR inhibitors that work even more effectively for individuals with TSC. I also mentioned that about 85% of individuals will develop epilepsy in their lifetime, 2/3 of which are still refractory, meaning we need to find better anti-seizure medications, which are so critical for controlling epilepsy and TSC. The PREVENT trial that I mentioned, we actually got results from. And though we did find that vigabatrin helped to lay or prevent infantile spasms, it didn't work in focal seizures, and it did not have an impact on cognitive outcomes or refractory epilepsy. So we know we have the right system for trying preventative medications. And in fact, there is the next preventative trial called the STEPS trial that are using sirolimus, an mTOR inhibitor, a disease-modifying treatment, instead of vigabatrin to see that if that will be more promising for actually preventing seizures overall and improving cognitive outcomes. When we think about TSC-associated neuropsychiatric disorders, our research right now is helping look at prognostic, predictive, and stratification biomarkers for manifestations of TAND, but also taking inpatient reported outcomes so that when we get to a point where we're ready to try treatments for TAND, we'll know if they have a real impact in quality of life for those living with TSC. Another area of our research that's really growing is in reproductive perinatal health. Everything we do, right, is centered on the patient. And one of the things that came out of our 2022 World TSC Conference was adults living with TSC saying, I want to be able to make that decision for myself if I want to have children. There's no consensus guidelines around this. There's very little direction that's been agreed on by experts. So if you're a woman with TSC and you get pregnant, what are the risks to your own health? How can we better monitor you and your fetus to make sure that you both have the best outcomes? And even before pregnancy, is IVF an opportunity to have pre-implantation to know that the embryo is free of TSC? And then for individuals that are pregnant and find out that they're carrying a child with TSC, and this is happening today, actually. TSC can be diagnosed because of 2 or more tumors in the heart. And sometimes those tumors can be very obstructive. And what's been happening lately is there's been case studies of mothers taking sirolimus or mTOR inhibitors to shrink the tumors for their baby. But there isn't any consensus about that. It's kind of because there have been case studies. Mm-hmm. So we really want to create evidence-based standards eventually by collecting enough data to provide guidance to individuals in our reproductive peri-health initiative, which we're super excited about. And then one other area that's really starting to take off is gene therapy. So we're working with some researchers and some companies on gene therapy in our preclinical consortium.
Well, I think it's super interesting. The perinatal aspect that you were talking about there is certainly a very important thing that needs more study into it, as your members have told you. And just thinking about that, it's a no man's land when it comes to health studies, right? Because no one wants to get involved with or cause harm to people who are pregnant, But right. This is a very important aspect for people with TSC. And as they're thinking about themselves getting pregnant or carrying children to term, it's something that they've got to deal with. So What is the plan to sort of approach that particular aspect? How do medications affect the fetus when someone is pregnant?
So one of the things we're doing is a manuscript call to action. What is the need in this area? The second is a risk stratification. It's all case studies right now.
Right.
And while we collect data, we can talk about the different risks. We can talk about risks around LAM or the lung involvement in TSC, risks if somebody has a growing kidney tumor, for instance, things that an individual would want to take into consideration with their healthcare professional. Eventually, what we want to do is to begin to collect more data so that we really, truly understand risks and outcomes of individuals with TSC that become pregnant so that we can provide an evidence-based level of guidance rather than right now it's here are the possible risks. Here's what we think we need to do. Here's how we evaluate that risk to move forward. And certainly maternal fetal health is definitely involved in this area. But you are right. There are definite medications that do impact fetuses. There are certain kind of epilepsy medications that can impact the health of a fetus. So all that data is being collected right now and is part of what will be manuscripts coming out to guide care in the future.
See. And another important aspect of research is educating the community about why their involvement is so crucial. You often hear this rallying cry in rare communities, nothing about us without us. Can you expand on the role that individuals and their families play in research?
I most certainly can. So I would say, first of all, we go to our community and do frequent surveys about what research is most impactful and most important to them. Everything we do has the patient at the center. When we do a strategic plan every 5 years, and we just completed one and started a new one in 2024, we start with a constituent survey and we ask them, what are the manifestations of TSC that most impact your quality of life? We ask them, what kind of research would you like or is most important to you for the TSC Alliance to conduct? Of course, most of the tools that I just talked about in our research platform are only successful when our community participates. They agree to be in the natural history database. They agree to give blood samples or cheek swabs. We have mobile phlebotomists that go out to our walks or at our world conferences to collect this. What's really important is to convey the why to our community. How is participating in this research going to help improve your quality of life? And why is it important to participate? The other thing that I'd say is on any of our steering committees, on our grant reviews, we always involved individuals with TSC or caregivers of individuals with TSC. So they are an intricate part of every piece of research that we do.
And let's turn to advocacy for a moment then. What are some of the significant ways that patients and families are involved in advocacy at the TSC Alliance? Because it's not just research. What are some of the outcomes of that advocacy that they've been participating in?
I love this question so much because it's one of the things I am most proud of. Our community, since fiscal year 2002, has advocated for the TSC research program at the Department of Defense. It exists and is successful because they either come to Washington to participate, or now, because of COVID, one of our learnings is that they can participate in meetings virtually. So that has been a real gift because it expands our involvement for families in these really important meetings. So every year, the first week of March or last week of February, and this year, it was last week of February, we had 120 families that came to participate in meetings in Washington, D.C., but we also had a whole army of families that were conducting virtual meetings at the same time. Why is this important? Because Congress needs to hear from our families living in their districts that this research is really important and has had really life impact for them and their families. So since 2002, $121 million has been appropriated to the TSC research program at the Department of Defense. And some of the huge breakthroughs that have come through are understanding the biology of how the TSC genes work with the mTOR pathway, which led to the first approved medications. Gene therapy. Research was first funded at our TSC research program. Some of the early behavioral assessment programs for TAND started at the TSC research program at the Department of Defense. Another really cool thing is that we get to nominate individuals to serve as consumer reviewers on the research panels. So they're not only advocating to make this research possible, they also get to review the research that gets funded from the program. It's just been so empowering, so impactful. There's so many things about TSC that individuals can't control, but they have a hand in progress through this program. It's been really amazing. The other way that people advocate is on a state level. So in Michigan, Maryland, Missouri, and Alabama, we have state research advocacy programs where $5.75 million has been allocated to our TSC clinics in those states or to conduct clinical research. So that's kind of a microcosm of what we do federally, but really important to individuals in those states.
Mm-hmm. If someone in the audience is living with TSC or has a new diagnosis in the family and wants to get involved in their community, whether that be through advocacy or participation in research, all of the great ways that we've talked about today, what advice do you have for them?
I'd say get in touch with the TSC Alliance. You can call 1-800-225-6872. Ask for our support navigators. So one of the first things we do for a newly diagnosed individual is have a 1-hour meeting with them just to talk about all of the resources that are available to them, how to connect with their local community. Is there a local meeting or a regional conference or a world conference coming up? How to access early intervention if we're talking to a mom of a new baby. So our support navigators are truly amazing. I would also say connect on social media, our Facebook discussion group, individuals that are there to help you. So Facebook at TSC Alliance, you can register there to become part of our private Facebook group. So the postings aren't seen by everybody and their brother. It is definitely private. So what you say is kept to that discussion group. And there, honestly, you will have lived experiences and a whole community there to support and hold you up. And then through our support navigators, connect peer-to-peer with your local community, get involved in local events, dive in. I think knowing that there are people out there to help and support you, hold your hand, but also getting involved in events and research gives you power over TSC. And so those are the ways that I would recommend getting involved.
And finally, as you look forward to the future, what is the TSC Alliance focused on? Let's say you come back on the show on the 55th anniversary of the TSC Alliance. What would you like to say the organization has accomplished then?
I love this question. Thank you. We have lots of things happening. One of the most important things, I think, is our focus on ensuring every TSC clinic has a transition plan and that we have more care for adults impacted by TSC. We know that's a gap. I hope when I come back 5 years from now, we have that figured out. We want to really drive patient-reported outcome measures for the most impactful aspects of TSC, but not only collect them, I'd really like to see this in practice where our patient-reported outcomes are really helping drive drug development. We want to see those preclinical models for TAN really being used, new therapeutics moving through our preclinical consortium, and hopefully into testing and clinical trials. We want to make meaningful progress on developing a newborn screening assay for TSC. So the PREVENT trial was one of our first steps. To get on the newborn screening panel, you have to have an intervention. And so we're not giving up on that. You also have to have a quick, easy, effective way to test every baby, at least right now, until we go into whole genome sequencing for newborn screening. And so we want to continue to make progress on that so that people aren't experiencing that diagnostic journey. You are screened as a newborn we have an intervention, and that really changes the course of TSC for that individual. We really want to implement a centralized data library. So I mentioned we're collecting data through our preclinical consortium. We're collecting data through clinical trials and through the PREVENT trial. And if we could put all of these data points into a centralized library, a sandbox, if you will, imagine the discoveries that could be made. So we just want to build that library and then have it available for researchers all around the world. We want to build more evidence-based guidelines to fill those gaps. Reproductive perinatal health is one of them. Another we're working on is sudden unexpected death from epilepsy in TSC. We want to encourage greater conversations between healthcare providers and individuals impacted by TSC. And then finally, we want to grow our global expertise as a better way to support our worldwide TSC community. Right now, we talk about vigabatrin a lot. It just keeps coming back up in our history. But right now, there are places around the world where individuals cannot access the first-line treatment for infantile spasms in TSC. There's a chronic gap right now in Mexico because they can't get the active ingredient in vigabatrin to make the drug. Therefore, it is not available in Mexico. And so we want to try filling in those gaps of access to care and access to treatment, working with our partner associations all around the world.
Well, lofty goals, but if the last 50 years are anything to go by, I know that you will hit them. Kari, we greatly appreciate you taking the time to come on the show again today. Thank you so much for sharing the great work you're doing over there. And once again, happy 50th anniversary to the TSC Alliance.
Thank you so much, Colby. And I'd say if anybody wants information, again, go to tscalliance.org, visit us on our social media platforms at TSC Alliance, and you can always call our support navigators, 1-800-225-6872, or send an email to support@tscalliance.org.
And I'll echo that here. If you'd like to get in touch with the TSC Alliance, we'll leave all of those links, including the website, socials, and also emails in the show notes for this episode so that you can check those out later. And remember, you can always keep up with the latest in rare disease news by visiting our website at patientworthy.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and more. Maybe at the same time you're following the TSC Alliance. And you can search for Patient Worthy on those platforms to find us. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Subscribing ensures you'll automatically receive our new monthly episodes as soon as they come out, and a review or rating really does go a long way toward helping us out. Finally, if you have any questions about the podcast or perhaps an idea for a future episode, you can get in touch with me by sending an email to Colby, that's Colby, at patientworthy.com. That does it for today's episode. Thank you once again to Kari Rosbeck from the TSC Alliance for joining me on the show today. And as always, thank you for listening.